Well, today we begin Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians, and First Thessalonians dealt a little bit with the theme of the return of Christ and when that might be, and that reflects a sense that it seemed like the return of Christ was impending, that it might be soon. Second Thessalonians, which is written some number of years later, is really addressing more the point of how does the church go on. How do we continue living in the world as followers of Christ? How do we be faithful in the meantime until that time, whenever it is, when Christ returns? And not surprisingly, Paul returns, as he does so many times, to several of his key themes. Our verse for the day, right from the opening of the letter, from chapter 1, verse 3, Paul says, "We must always give thanks to God for you, brothers and sisters, as is right, because your faith is growing abundantly, and the love of every one of you for one another is increasing." So, shockingly, Paul is touching on faith and love as he begins yet another letter to a faith community. And let's look at those two things. Your faith is growing abundantly. How would you evaluate the growth of your faith? I'm not a gardener. We don't spend much time in our yard or give much attention to our yard. We have what our friend Joe Linnell calls as a Cape Cod yard. We've got moss, and as long as it's green and growing, I really don't care what it is. But part of what's impressive to me is how some of you are very good gardeners, and you're great at growing flowers and vegetables and different types of food and plants. And things that are healthy grow. And that's true not only of plants, it's also true of faith. A healthy faith is a growing faith. And that's something that Paul touches on in so many of his letters. How can you tell if your tomato plant is healthy and growing? Well, tomatoes show up, and they're usually small and green to start with, and they get larger, and their color changes over time. And in a similar way, there will be fruit, as Paul wrote to the Galatians, that gives evidence that our faith is growing over time. And of course, he also touches on the love of every one of you for one another is increasing. Can you and I say that? Is your love for everyone, is your love for other people increasing? For those in your family, for those in the church, for those in your neighborhood? I mean, the fundamental way Jesus says his disciples will be known is by our love for one another. And the great commandment after loving God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind is to love our neighbor as ourselves. I pray that you would do what you can today to make sure your faith and your love are growing and increasing a little bit.